Before we could map the stars or split the atom, we were already haunted by the shadows beneath our hulls. For as long as our ancestors have walked the shorelines, the ocean has been a source of profound, existential dread. It is a realm that defies the fundamental logic of human survival. On land, we have boundaries. We have light, we have gravity we can understand, and we have a horizon we can reach. But the sea? The sea is a vast, liquid void that swallows the sun. It is a place where the very medium of life becomes a crushing weight, a place where the darkness isn't just an absence of light, but a presence in itself. This fear is not merely a product of superstition. It is a primal, evolutionary response to the unknown. To the ancient mind, the ocean was the ultimate other. It was a chaotic, unpredictable force that could erase a man, a ship, or an entire civilization without leaving so much as a ripple on the surface. We looked at the vast, undulating blue and realized that we were not the masters of this planet, but merely guests on its thin, fragile crust. Psychologically, this is what we call thalassophobia, the intense fear of deep, vast bodies of water. But it is more than just a fear of drowning. It is the fear of what lies beneath the surface, lurking in the bathypelagic zone, where the pressure is so immense it would collapse a human lung in a fraction of a second. For the ancients, this wasn't a matter of physics or barometric pressure. It was a matter of the supernatural. They felt the weight of the deep, a crushing psychological pressure that suggested something massive, something ancient, was watching from the dark. In the absence of sonar, submersibles, or satellite imagery, the human imagination filled the vacuum. When a sailor saw a massive, dark shape slip beneath the keel, or when a storm tossed a vessel into the churning maw of a swell, the mind didn't reach for biology. It reached for monsters. We projected our deepest anxieties onto the abyss. We imagined coiled limbs, lidless eyes the size of dinner plates, and predators that did not just eat flesh, but consumed the very soul of the voyager. Even today, as we possess the technology to pierce the darkness, that ancient dread remains. We have sent probes into the Hadal trenches, yet we still find ourselves unsettled by the sheer scale of the emptiness. There is a scientific truth to our unease. We have explored less than 5% of the global ocean. We are effectively living on a planet where 95% of the habitat remains a total mystery. The abyss is not just a location, it is a psychological frontier. It represents the limit of human knowledge. Every time we send a camera into the midnight zone, we are not just looking for animals, we are looking for answers to the questions our ancestors whispered in the dark. We are searching for the source of the echoes, the reason why, for thousands of years, humanity has looked at the sea and felt with terrifying certainty that something is looking back. But where does a shadow become a legend? Where does a vague sense of dread solidify into a name that can freeze the blood of even the most seasoned mariner? To find the origin of our modern obsession with the giant squid, we must travel north, away from the warm currents of the tropics and into the frigid, churning gray of the North Sea and the Norwegian Sea. Here, amidst the jagged fjords and the relentless spray of the Atlantic, the myth of the kraken was born. In Scandinavian folklore, the kraken was not merely a large animal. It was a force of nature, a living catastrophe. Unlike the more localized sea serpents of other cultures, the kraken was described as something so gargantuan that it was often mistaken for an island. Sailors would attempt to land upon its massive, mottled back, only to realize too late that the land was breathing, and that the cliffs were actually colossal, suckered appendages rising from the depths. The terror was not just in the creature's size, but in its perceived ability to manipulate the sea itself. Legends spoke of the kraken creating massive whirlpools, maelstroms, simply by descending back into the abyss, dragging entire fleets down into a watery grave. This wasn't just a predator hunting for sustenance. This was a maritime deity of chaos. The folklore of the North was shaped by a very specific kind of maritime trauma. The waters surrounding Scandinavia are treacherous, characterized by sudden temperature shifts and violent storms. For a Viking or a medieval Norse fisherman, a sudden disappearance at sea was a common, terrifying reality. Without the benefit of oceanography, the most logical explanation for a ship vanishing without a trace was a predator of impossible proportions. What makes the Kraken particularly fascinating to the modern mind is how the myth evolved. In early accounts, it was often depicted as a crab-like behemoth, a crustacean of nightmare proportions. But as centuries passed and more sightings of tentacled horrors were reported by whaling vessels, the description shifted. The creature became more cephalopod, more fluid, more intelligent, and more terrifyingly limb-heavy. Interestingly, there is a kernel of biological truth hidden beneath the layers of Norse superstition. While the Kraken was a creature of myth, it shared a terrifying commonality with the real-world Architeuthis, the concept of the unseen colossal. Even in the 17th and 18th centuries, as naturalists began to catalog the world, they struggled to reconcile the sheer scale of what was being reported. We now know that certain deep-sea organisms utilize a phenomenon called gigantism, where species living in cold, high-pressure environments evolve to much larger sizes than their shallow-water relatives. This isn't just a quirk of evolution, it is a biological response to metabolic efficiency in the deep. To a sailor in the year 1600, witnessing a massive, pale limb emerge from a swell or seeing the carcass of a deep-sea creature washed up on a rocky shore, the line between a biological anomaly and a mythological god didn't just blur. It vanished entirely. The Kraken was the ocean's way of making sense of the inexplicable. It was the personification of the deep's power to destroy, a legend built from the wreckage of lost ships and the whispers of men who had looked into the dark and seen something that shouldn't exist. But if the Kraken was the mythic soul of the North, what of the men who actually lived by the grace of the sea? For the whalers of the 18th and 19th centuries, the ocean was not a place of folklore. It was a workplace, a violent, blood-soaked industry where survival was measured in barrels of oil and the strength of a hull. And for these men, the monsters weren't just stories told over grog. They were tangible, terrifying threats that left scars on both wood and flesh. The whaling industry brought humanity into its most violent collision with the deep. While hunting the great sperm whales, these mariners were inadvertently entering the primary hunting grounds of Architeuthis ducks. They were witnessing a biological war zone, often without realizing the true identity of the third combatant. Historical logs from whaling vessels frequently describe unnatural encounters. There are accounts of ships being beset by massive, pale appendages that would wrap around the bow or lash against the sides of the hull with enough force to splinter oak. These weren't the graceful movements of a creature in a calm sea. These were the desperate, muscular contractions of a predator in high-stakes combat. One of the most chilling aspects of these accounts is the description of the ghostly nature of the attacks. Whalers often reported seeing massive, eye-like shapes lurking just beneath the surface, or limbs that seemed to emerge from the darkness with no visible body attached. To a man standing on a creaking deck in the middle of a moonless night, the sight of a single, sucker-clad tentacle, thick as a mast, rising from the black swell would feel less like biology and more like an assault from another dimension. Crucially, these whalers provided the first unintentional evidence of the squid's true lethality. They spoke of beasts that would strike at the whales, and by extension, the boats during the heat of a hunt. While they often attributed these attacks to the whales themselves or to sea serpents, we now understand they were witnessing the apex of deep-sea predation. There is a scientific detail often overlooked in these old journals: the description of circular, serrated scars found on the skin of captured whales. Early mariners saw these as marks of battle between whales, but modern marine biologists recognize them as the unmistakable signature of the giant squid's suction cups. The rings of chitinous, sharp teeth embedded in those suckers are designed to grip and tear. And when a squid latches onto a whale, it isn't just holding on, it is anchoring itself to a moving mountain. These encounters were often chaotic and brief. A squid might strike, lash against the hull, and vanish back into the crushing depths before a harpoon could even be leveled. This brevity added to the psychological trauma. The predator was a phantom, a creature that could damage a vessel and then disappear into a realm where humans could not follow. The whalers were the first to document the collision of worlds. They were the bridge between the ancient, superstitious fear of the kraken and the emerging, documented reality of a massive cephalopod predator. They didn't just bring back oil and bone, they brought back stories of a silent, tentacled terror that lived just beneath the keel, waiting for the light to fail. But how does a biological reality transform into a monster of legend? To understand the anatomy of a myth, we must understand the anatomy of a lie specifically. The kind of lie born from exhaustion, salt spray, and the sheer, terrifying scale of the unknown. When a sailor recounts a tale of a creature that could swallow a longboat whole, he isn't necessarily a liar. He is a victim of perspective. In the vast, featureless expanse of the open ocean, the human brain struggles to calibrate size. Without a fixed point of reference, a 10-foot tentacle becomes 100 feet of writhing muscle. A shadow beneath the hull becomes a leviathan. This phenomenon, known as perceptual distortion, is compounded by the physiological toll of maritime life. Sleep deprivation, the rhythmic, hypnotic motion of the swells, and the constant threat of death create a psychological state where the line between a sighting and a hallucination becomes dangerously thin. The myth-making process is often a game of biological telephone. A single encounter with a displaced architeuthis, perhaps a specimen washed up by a deep-sea current or a lone individual venturing too close to the surface, would be reported to a mate, then a captain, and finally recorded in a ship's log. With every retelling, the creature grows. The muscular, jet-propelled cephalopod of the abyss is slowly replaced by a shapeless, supernatural entity. The squid's mantle, a sophisticated organ for locomotion, is reimagined as a cavernous maw. Its intelligent, highly centralized nervous system is dismissed as a mindless, demonic hunger. However, there is a darker, more calculated element to these exaggerations. In the high-stakes world of maritime commerce, a monster sighting served a social purpose. A tale of a kraken-like terror could explain away a lost shipment, justify a change in course, or simply command the rapt attention of a crew during the long, doldrum nights. The myth became a psychological shield, a way to personify the chaotic, indifferent cruelty of the ocean. It is far more comforting to believe you are being hunted by a sentient demon than to accept that you are merely a speck of dust in a vast, crushing void that doesn't even know you exist. We must also consider the fragmentary evidence that fueled these legends. For centuries, the only physical proof of the giant squid came in the form of beached anomalies. When a carcass washed ashore, it was often in a state of advanced decomposition. A bloated, discolored mantle and the sprawling, tangled mess of decaying tentacles do not look like the streamlined predator we see in modern ROV footage. They look like something alien. They look like something broken. These fragments were the raw materials of folklore. They allowed the human imagination to fill in the gaps where science had failed. We took the serrated rings of the suction cups and turned them into teeth. We took the massive, light-sensitive eyes and turned them into staring voids of malice. In doing so, we didn't just describe a creature. We built a monument to our own inadequacy. We created the kraken not because it was real, but because the truth, a massive, soft-bodied mollusk living in the dark, wasn't quite terrifying enough to match the scale of the ocean's mystery. But what if we look past the exaggeration and ask a more difficult question? What if the monsters were actually real, just slightly different than we imagined? To bridge the gap between folklore and biology, we have to move away from the lens of the storyteller and into the lens of the taxonomist. For centuries, humanity has been playing a game of cosmic guesswork, attempting to categorize the impossible using only the scraps of the possible. When we examine the core components of sea monster legends, we find a startlingly consistent pattern. They are not fabrications of nothingness, but rather biological exaggerations of very real, very strange organisms. Take, for example, the serpent-like dragons of antiquity. While often dismissed as pure fantasy, modern marine biology offers a compelling candidate, the oarfish. Regalchus glesni, the world's longest bony fish, can reach lengths of over 50 feet. Its silver, ribbon-like body and elongated dorsal fin create a shimmering, undulating movement that, when glimpsed through the distorting lens of deep water, perfectly mimics the description of a sea serpent. When an oarfish rises from the depths, a phenomenon often linked to seismic shifts or changes in ocean currents, it brings with it the ancient archetype of the serpent, providing a physical anchor for a myth that had existed for millennia. Then there are the multi-limbed terrors, the many-armed horrors that rose from the depths to drag ships into the abyss. While the kraken is the most famous iteration, the biological blueprint for such a creature has existed since the Cambrian explosion. We see the monster in the oversized anatomy of the colossal squid, Mesenichotuthis hamiltoni, which possesses rotating, sharp-edged hooks on its tentacles rather than simple suction cups. To a sailor witnessing a single, hooked limb break the surface in the moonlight, the distinction between a suction cup and a clutching claw is irrelevant. The biology is there, only the scale is skewed. Even the terrifying eye of the beast, that unblinking, predatory gaze described in countless maritime journals, finds its scientific footing in the extreme ocular evolution of deep-sea cephalopods. The giant squid doesn't just have large eyes, it possesses eyes the size of dinner plates, specifically evolved to detect the bioluminescent searchlights of predators like the sperm whale. This is not a supernatural trait, but a high-performance biological necessity. In the pitch-black bathypelagic zone, light is the most precious commodity, and the ability to capture a single photon can mean the difference between life and death. We see this pattern repeated across the spectrum of myth. The beast with the impenetrable hide may well have been an encounter with a deep-diving shark or a large cetacean. The tentacled demon was likely a displaced cephalopod. Science tells us that legends are rarely born from thin air. Instead, they are the result of a biological truth being stretched across the canvas of human fear. We took the specialized adaptations of the deep, the bioluminescence, the extreme size, the specialized weaponry, and we translated them into a language of terror. We didn't invent the monsters, we simply misread the biology. But if these legends are merely biological truths stretched by fear, why did one creature, above all others, capture the collective psyche of the human race so completely? Why did the giant squid transcend the status of a mere misidentified animal to become the definitive icon of the unknown? The answer lies in a unique intersection of visibility and invisibility. Most deep-sea creatures are masters of being unseen. They are small, translucent, or move with such efficiency that they leave no trace of their passage. But the giant squid, Architeuthis dux, operates on a different scale entirely. It is a creature of contradictions. It is a phantom that can be felt through the massive, scarred bodies of whales or the sudden appearance of a colossal, decaying carcass on a remote shoreline, yet it remains almost impossible to observe in its natural state. This creates a psychological phenomenon known as the presence of an absence. We know something massive is moving through the dark. We have the physical evidence of its existence, yet we cannot look it in the eye. This mystery is compounded by the sheer alien nature of its physiology. When we finally began to study the anatomy of the squid, we didn't find a creature that felt like a fish or a whale. We found something that felt like a visitor from another world. Consider its nervous system. Unlike the centralized brains of vertebrates, the giant squid possesses a decentralized intelligence, with much of its thinking and movement distributed throughout its arms. It is a distributed consciousness, a living knot of muscle and instinct that defies our traditional understanding of sentient life. Furthermore, the giant squid occupies a specific ecological niche that amplifies its mythic status, the bathypelagic zone. This is not just a place, it is a barrier. It is a realm where the pressure is so immense it would crush a human lung in a fraction of a second, and where the temperature hovers just above freezing. By inhabiting this no man's land, the squid became the gatekeeper of the abyss. To encounter one was not just to see an animal, but to be granted a terrifying glimpse into a realm where humans simply do not belong. Even its very name carries a weight of mystery. For decades, the scientific community struggled to even agree on its taxonomy. Was it a true squid, a specialized octopus, a relic of a prehistoric lineage? This taxonomic uncertainty fed the public's imagination. It allowed the squid to exist in a state of perpetual becoming, a creature that was always on the verge of being defined, yet always slipping back into the shadows. The giant squid became our ultimate icon because it represents the perfect scientific mystery, a creature that is biologically plausible, yet functionally supernatural. It is large enough to be a monster, strange enough to be an alien, and elusive enough to remain a ghost. It sits at the exact threshold where biology ends and folklore begins, serving as a living reminder that even in an age of satellites and deep-sea probes, there are still shadows in the deep that refuse to be illuminated. We didn't just misread its biology, we fell in love with the enigma of its existence. To find the truth behind the myth, we must do something that no human can do for long. We must leave the light behind. To understand the giant squid, we cannot simply look at it. We must first understand the architecture of the void it calls home. The ocean is not a uniform body of water. It is a vertical empire, divided into distinct, stratified kingdoms, each governed by its own laws of physics, light, and survival. As we begin our descent, we start in the epipelagic zone, the sunlit surface. This is the realm of the familiar. From the surface down to about 200 meters, the sun is a dominant force. Here, photosynthesis fuels a frantic, high-energy world. This is the engine room of the planet, where the water is warm, oxygen is abundant, and the light allows for a visual feast. But as we drift deeper, the golden hues of the surface begin to bleed away. The reds vanish first, swallowed by the water column, followed by the oranges and yellows. We are entering the mesopelagic, often called the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone is a place of profound biological tension. It is a realm of perpetual dusk, where the sunlight is too weak to support plant life, but just strong enough to allow predators to see their prey. Here, the water begins to cool, and a phenomenon known as the deep scattering layer emerges, a massive, nightly migration of billions of organisms that rise toward the surface to feed under the cover of darkness, only to retreat back into the gloom at dawn. It is a rhythmic, vertical pulse of life, a conveyor belt of energy that eventually feeds the giants waiting below. But the transition from the twilight to the deep is not a gradual fade. It is a threshold of survival. As we pass the 200-meter mark, we leave the last vestiges of solar influence behind. We are descending into the bathypelagic, the midnight zone. In this realm, the concept of day and night ceases to exist. From 1,000 meters down to 4,000, the ocean is an absolute, crushing blackness. This is no longer a world of reflection, but a world of emission. In the absence of the sun, life has invented its own light. Bioluminescence becomes the primary language of the deep. It is used for courtship, for luring unsuspecting prey, and for the terrifying burglar alarms used by some species to illuminate their attackers. The physics here change fundamentally. The pressure is no longer a weight. It is an all-encompassing, relentless force measured in hundreds of atmospheres. At these depths, the water is near freezing, and the scarcity of food becomes the defining rule of existence. Most creatures here are shaped by this emptiness. They are often slow-moving, energy-efficient, or gelatinous, designed to prevent their own bodies from being crushed by the very medium they inhabit. It is within this specific, crushing darkness, this bathypelagic void, that the giant squid reigns. It does not merely live in the dark, it is an extension of it. It occupies the space where the pressure is immense and the light is non-existent, navigating a vertical desert that would be a graveyard for almost any other apex predator. To find the squid, we must master the descent, moving past the sunlight, through the twilight, and into the heart of the eternal night. But before we reach that absolute, crushing void, we must pause in the transition, in the strange, flickering realm of the mesopelagic. If the surface is a riot of color and the midnight zone is a silent tomb, then the twilight zone is a theater of shadows. It is a world defined by what is missing. Here, between 200 and 1,000 meters, the sun's reach becomes a ghostly memory. This is not the darkness of a closed eye, but the darkness of a dimming candle. It is a zone of profound physiological paradox. It is too dark for plants to grow, meaning there is no primary production through photosynthesis, yet it is too bright to be truly hidden. In this half-light, every silhouette is a potential death sentence. In the mesopelagic, survival is a game of visual deception. Because the light is directional, filtering down from above, creatures have evolved a specialized trick known as counterillumination. Many inhabitants, from tiny bristlemouth fish to complex crustaceans, possess photophores, light-producing organs located on their undersides. By emitting a faint, downward-facing glow that perfectly matches the intensity and color of the dim sunlight filtering from the surface, they effectively erase their own shadows. They become invisible, blending into the faint glow of the sky above, hiding from the predators lurking in the depths below. This is a realm of extreme biological density, a crowded corridor of life that acts as the ocean's great metabolic bridge. While the deeper zones are often described as deserts, the Twilight Zone is teeming. It is home to the largest migration on Earth. Every single night, as the surface world settles into darkness, a massive biomass, the deep scattering layer, begins a vertical ascent. Trillions of tiny organisms, from lanternfish to siphonophores, rise from the depths to feed on the nutrient-rich surface waters, only to descend again at the first hint of dawn. This rhythmic, nightly pulse of life creates a high-stakes hunting ground. It is a vertical highway of energy, and for a predator of the scale of Architeuthis ducks, this layer is more than just a habitat. It is a buffet. But the mesopelagic is also a place of chemical struggle. As we descend further, we encounter the oxygen minimum zone. Here, the biological demand for oxygen, driven by the decomposition of organic matter falling from above, often outstrips the supply. In certain parts of the ocean, the oxygen levels drop so low that they create a physiological barrier, a dead zone that few complex organisms can penetrate. To survive here, life must be masters of efficiency, possessing specialized blood chemistry or metabolic rates that allow them to thrive where others would suffocate. The Twilight Zone is the ultimate testing ground. It is a place of constant vigilance, where light is a weapon, darkness is a shield, and the very chemistry of the water dictates who lives and who dies. It is the staging area for the deep. To understand the giant squid, we must realize that it does not just inhabit the darkness. It stalks the edge of this twilight, waiting for the moment when the shadows move, and the massive, vertical heartbeat of the ocean brings its prey within reach. If you were to descend into the realm where the giant squid truly reigns, you wouldn't just be fighting the darkness. You would be fighting the very laws of physics. As we move beyond the flickering shadows of the mesopelagic and descend into the bathypelagic, the midnight zone, the environment undergoes a violent transformation. We are no longer merely traveling through water, we are entering a realm of unimaginable weight. At these depths, the pressure is not a mere sensation. It is a crushing, omnipresent force. For every 10 meters you descend, the pressure increases by one entire atmosphere. By the time we reach the depths inhabited by Architeuth's ducks, the weight of the water column above is equivalent to having an elephant stand on your thumb, or more accurately, having a heavy-duty truck resting on every square inch of your body. For most terrestrial life, this would be an instantaneous death sentence. Our lungs would collapse, our bones would shatter, and our very cellular structures would buckle under the strain. But the giant squid is a masterwork of biological equilibrium. It does not fight the pressure, it incorporates it. Unlike humans, who rely on air-filled cavities like lungs to breathe, the giant squid is composed almost entirely of incompressible fluids and non-compressible tissues. Because water is nearly impossible to compress, the internal pressure of the squid's body matches the external pressure of the abyss. They are, in a sense, pressure neutral. Their cells are reinforced with specialized lipids and proteins that maintain their shape and function even when squeezed by forces that would flatten a steel canister. This is a delicate, high-stakes chemistry. If a giant squid were to be brought to the surface too quickly, the sudden loss of this external support wouldn't necessarily cause the bends in the way we understand it, but the radical shift in osmotic pressure could wreak havoc on their delicate internal cellular stability. But the crushing weight is only half of the ordeal. As the pressure climbs, the temperature plummets. We have left the temperate currents of the surface behind and entered a world of perpetual, near-freezing stasis. In the deep, the water hovers just above freezing, often between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. In this thermal desert, the very concept of movement becomes a metabolic nightmare. Cold temperatures slow down chemical reactions. They make enzymes sluggish and turn fats into rigid, useless waxes. To a creature of the surface, the deep sea is a refrigerator that threatens to freeze life mid-motion. Yet, the giant squid thrives in this chill. To survive, they have evolved a specialized metabolic strategy. They don't possess the frantic, high-energy lifestyle of a tuna or a shark. Instead, they are masters of low-gear living. Their biochemistry is fine-tuned to operate at peak efficiency in the cold, utilizing specialized enzymes that remain flexible and active where others would seize up. They are the ultimate energy economists, moving with a slow, ghostly grace that conserves every precious calorie. They exist in a state of physiological poise, balancing the need for predatory power against the brutal reality of a world that is simultaneously heavy enough to crush and cold enough to freeze the very spark of life. To live here is to exist on the razor's edge of physical possibility. But even if you could withstand the crushing weight and the bone-chilling cold, you would still face a more profound obstacle: the absolute, total absence of the sun. As we cross the threshold into the bathypelagic, we enter a realm where the concept of day and night ceases to exist. Sunlight is not merely dimmed here, it is extinct. The photons that fuel the world above are swallowed by the water column, leaving a void so profound that it feels less like an environment and more like a vacuum. In this eternal midnight, the traditional rules of vision and survival are rendered obsolete. In a world of true black, eyes, no matter how large, become useless if there is nothing to reflect light. And yet, the deep sea is not truly dark. It is a realm of cold, chemical fire. This is the domain of bioluminescence, the ability of living organisms to produce light through internal biochemical reactions. In the abyss, light is not a gift from the heavens. It is a tool, a weapon, and a language. It is generated when a molecule called luciferin reacts with oxygen, catalyzed by an enzyme known as luciferase. This reaction produces cold light. meaning nearly 100% of the energy is emitted as light rather than heat, a vital efficiency in a world where every calorie is a precious commodity. For the inhabitants of the Midnight Zone, bioluminescence is the primary medium of communication. Some creatures use it as a burglar alarm, flashing brilliantly when attacked to attract an even larger predator to eat their assailant. Others use it for counterillumination, a sophisticated form of active camouflage. By emitting a faint, downward-facing glow from their bellies, they can match the dim, residual light filtering from above, effectively erasing their silhouette from the sight of predators lurking below. They become ghosts, invisible even in a world of light. But for the giant squid, light is more than just a way to hide or signal. It is a way to hunt. While many deep-sea creatures use light to attract prey with delicate, glowing lures, the giant squid operates on a grander, more terrifying scale. While we often think of the squid as a creature of the dark, its massive eyes, the largest in the animal kingdom, are specifically evolved to detect the faintest, most transient flashes of bioluminescence. They are not looking for the sun, they are looking for the spark of life. A single, panicked flash from a startled shrimp or the rhythmic glow of a passing jellyfish acts as a beacon, signaling a potential meal in the void. The giant squid's visual system is a masterpiece of evolutionary specialization. Their eyes are tuned to the blue-green spectrum, the exact wavelength that travels furthest through seawater and the most common color of biological light. They possess a specialized layer behind the retina called the tapetum lucidum, which reflects light back through the photoreceptors, giving them a second chance to capture every stray photon. In this lightless expanse, life has turned the darkness itself into a sensory landscape. To the uninitiated, the abyss is a tomb of shadows. But to the giant squid, it is a high-contrast theater of flickering signals, where a single pulse of light can be the difference between a feast and starvation. In the deep, light is the ultimate currency, and the giant squid is its most patient collector. But even as the squid masters the theater of light, it must contend with a silent, invisible killer lurking in the water column. A suffocating void where the very breath of life begins to fail. As we descend further, we encounter a phenomenon that defies our terrestrial intuition. In most ecosystems, oxygen is a plentiful resource, distributed by currents and replenished by the atmosphere. But in the deep, there exists a barrier known as the oxygen minimum zone, or OMZ. This is a layer of the ocean where the concentration of dissolved oxygen plummets to levels that would be instantly fatal to almost any creature we recognize. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the ocean's biological pump. As organic matter, dead plankton, fish waste, and marine snow sinks from the sunlit surface toward the abyss, it doesn't just fall, it decays. This decomposition is a chemical process that consumes oxygen. In these midwater layers, the rate of oxygen consumption by bacteria far outpaces the rate at which new oxygen can be replenished by deep-sea currents. The result is a vast, hypoxic dead zone, a liquid desert, where the oxygen levels are so low they are measured in micromoles rather than percentages. For most marine life, the OMZ is an impassable wall, a chemical prison. If a surface-dwelling fish were to drift into this zone, it would effectively drown in midwater. Yet, the giant squid does not merely survive these zones, it utilizes them. This is where the biology of Architeuthis ducks moves from the miraculous to the profound. To navigate a world with almost no oxygen, the giant squid has evolved a highly specialized respiratory efficiency. While many cephalopods are notoriously oxygen-hungry, requiring high flow rates to sustain their metabolic demands, the giant squid's circulatory system is a masterpiece of high-pressure engineering. They possess a highly efficient hemocyanin, a copper-based protein in their blood, that is specialized to bind and release oxygen even when the surrounding medium is incredibly sparse. But the squid's relationship with the OMZ is more than just physiological, it is tactical. The oxygen minimum zone acts as a natural sanctuary. By venturing into these low oxygen depths, the giant squid can hide from its most formidable predator, the sperm whale. Sperm whales are high-performance mammals with massive metabolic requirements. To hunt, they must dive deep, but they are ultimately tethered to the surface by the need to breathe air. They cannot linger in the OMZ for long. The physiological cost of hunting in such a hypoxic environment is too great. The giant squid, however, can slip into these dead zones, using the lack of oxygen as a cloak of invisibility. It turns a biological wasteland into a tactical fortress. In this way, the giant squid has mastered a paradox. It thrives in the darkness, it hunts by the light, and it finds safety in the very emptiness that should kill it. It is a creature that has turned the ocean's greatest limitations into its greatest advantages, proving that in the deep, survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. If the oxygen minimum zone is a tactical fortress, then the world beyond it is a frontier so vast, it borders on the incomprehensible. We have spoken of the layers of the ocean, the sunlit surface, the Twilight Zone, and the hypoxic voids, but these are merely the foothills of a much grander, much more terrifying landscape. Below the OMZ lies the true abyss, the bathypelagic and abyssopelagic zones, where the seafloor drops away into trenches so deep they could swallow Mount Everest whole and still have room to spare. This is the great unknown. It is a realm of topographical extremes, defined by massive submarine canyons, hydrothermal vent fields, and trenches like the Mariana, where the pressure reaches over 8 tons per square inch, the equivalent of having an elephant stand on your thumb. To a human, this is a landscape of crushing finality. To the giant squid, it is the ultimate expanse of the hunting ground. But here we encounter a humbling reality. Our map of this world is, quite literally, a work of fiction. While we have mapped the surface of Mars and the Moon with exquisite precision, our understanding of the deep-sea trenches remains frustratingly primitive. We possess more detailed topographical maps of the lunar highlands than we do of the Hadal Zone, the deepest reaches of the ocean trenches. Why is the mapping so difficult? It is not just the depth, it is the medium. Traditional sonar, which relies on sound waves bouncing off the seafloor, struggles with the sheer complexity of the deep. The extreme temperature gradients and varying salinity levels of the deep water column create shadow zones, where sound waves bend and refract, creating ghost images and blind spots. We are essentially trying to draw a portrait of a ghost through a thick, shifting fog. Furthermore, the deep sea is not a flat, sandy desert. It is a labyrinth of jagged volcanic ridges and massive sediment plumes. When we send remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, into these trenches, they are navigating a terrain that is constantly being reshaped by tectonic shifts and massive undersea landslides. We are mapping a world that is fundamentally unstable. Current oceanographic technology is only just beginning to scratch the surface of this mystery. We are moving away from simple sonar and toward autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, that can glide through these trenches like silent, robotic sentinels, using multi-beam echosounders to piece together a digital twin of the abyss. But even with these advancements, we are playing a game of catch-up. Every time we deploy a new sensor, we find that the empty trenches are teeming with unexpected life, and the barren plains are actually complex ecosystems fueled by chemical energy rather than sunlight. We are discovering that the topography of the deep sea dictates the very flow of life itself. The trenches act as massive conduits, funneling nutrients and currents in ways we are only beginning to model. As we attempt to chart these dark canyons, we must ask ourselves, are we merely mapping a geography, or are we mapping the habitat of a ghost? For every kilometer of trench we successfully chart, we realize how much of the giant squid's kingdom remains a complete blank space on our charts. We are looking into the eyes of a monster, only to realize we haven't even learned the shape of its home. In a world defined by a total absence of light, how does one become a master of vision? If the trenches are the architecture of the abyss, then the eyes of Architeuthis ducks are its most sophisticated sensors. To understand the scale of this biological achievement, you have to move past the concept of seeing as we know it. For a human, sight is a luxury of the sunlit world. For the giant squid, sight is a survival imperative, a high-stakes game of detecting the faintest flicker of movement in a void that should, by all laws of physics, be pitch black. To achieve this, evolution has gifted the giant squid with one of the largest visual organs in the entire animal kingdom. We are talking about eyes the size of dinner plates, some reaching up to 27 centimeters in diameter. But their size isn't just a feat of scale. It is a masterclass in optical engineering. In the deep ocean, light doesn't arrive in steady streams. It arrives in sporadic, ghostly pulses. This is the realm of bioluminescence, the biological fireflies of the deep. Most creatures here produce their own light to lure prey or distract predators, creating a landscape of tiny, moving sparks against an infinite black canvas. To a predator, these sparks are not just lights. They are signals of life, of movement, of opportunity. The giant squid's massive eyes act as enormous light-gathering funnels. By maximizing the aperture of the eye, the squid can capture even a single photon of light that might otherwise be lost to the abyss. But the true secret lies in the structure of the retina and the specialized way they process this information. Unlike the human eye, which relies on a complex mix of rods and cones to distinguish color and detail, the giant squid's vision is hyper-specialized for contrast and motion detection. They possess a massive density of photoreceptors designed to detect blue-shifted light. In the deep ocean, blue is the only color that travels effectively through water. Red and yellow wavelengths are absorbed almost immediately by the water column. Consequently, the giant squid has evolved to perceive a world rendered almost entirely in shades of cerulean and cobalt. But there is a deeper, more tactical layer to this vision. Scientists believe the giant squid uses its eyes not just to see prey, but to detect the silhouettes of much larger threats. Imagine a sperm whale, a massive shadow descending from the upper layers. To a smaller creature, the whale is invisible until it is upon them. But to the giant squid, whose eyes are positioned laterally to provide a near-panoramic field of view, that whale is a looming, dark shape breaking the faint bioluminescent glow of the water column. This creates a terrifying paradox of the deep. The very eyes that allow the squid to hunt are the same eyes that allow its enemies to find it. It is a biological arms race played out in the dark. The squid isn't just looking for food, it is scanning for the subtle displacement of light that signals a predator's approach. In this lightless theater, vision is not about clarity or color. It is about the detection of a shadow. The giant squid does not see the world as a landscape, but as a series of fleeting, luminous interruptions in a perfect, silent darkness. But vision, no matter how profound, is merely the prelude to the strike. Once a target is identified through that pane of biological glass, the giant squid must transition from a silent observer to a kinetic force of nature. To understand how it closes the distance, we must look beyond the eyes and toward the true instruments of its lethality, an intricate, terrifying array of limbs designed for one purpose: absolute capture. The anatomy of Architeuthis ducks is a study in specialized asymmetry. While most people use the terms arms and tentacles interchangeably, in the world of the giant squid, the distinction is a matter of life and death. The squid possesses 8 arms, which are shorter, more muscular, and used for the fine-tuned manipulation of prey once it has been caught. But extending far beyond these arms are the 2 long feeding tentacles. These are not mere appendages. they are biological harpoons. In a sudden, explosive movement, these tentacles can lash out across the void, extending their reach to bridge the gap between predator and prey in a fraction of a second. At the distal end of each tentacle sits a specialized sucker, a club-like structure that acts as the primary point of contact. This is where the squid's physical dominance truly begins. If you were to look closely at these suckers under a microscope, you would find a level of engineering that defies imagination. They are not smooth, skin-like surfaces. Instead, the rim of each sucker is lined with sharp, serrated chitinous rings. These are essentially circular saws made of biological protein. When the tentacle strikes, these rings bite into the flesh of the prey, ensuring that once contact is made, escape is mathematically improbable. This serration allows the squid to maintain a grip on slippery, deep-sea organisms that would otherwise slide away in the high-pressure environment. But the weaponry does not end with the grip. The suckers themselves operate on a principle of vacuum physics. By rapidly contracting the muscular walls of the sucker cup, the squid creates a localized zone of low pressure, a powerful suction that locks the prey in place. This combination of mechanical cutting and hydraulic force allows the squid to grapple with prey that may be nearly as large as itself. Once the tentacles have reeled the victim inward, the 8 arms take over. They wrap around the prey in a coordinated, constricting embrace, pulling it toward the center of the squid's underside. It is here, at the very heart of this anatomical storm, that the squid's most devastating tool resides: the beak. Hidden within the mass of limbs is a pair of powerful, parrot-like mandibles. Composed of incredibly hard, dark chitin, this beak is capable of exerting tremendous crushing force. It does not merely bite, it shears. The beak is designed to cut through bone, shell, and muscle with surgical precision, reducing the captured prey into manageable pieces for the esophagus. This is the terrifying reality of the giant squid's hunting sequence. It is a multi-stage process of detection, projection, constriction, and consumption. The eyes find the shadow, the tentacles launch the strike, the serrated suckers lock the grip, and the beak delivers the final, decisive blow. In the silent, crushing depths of the midnight zone, this is not just hunting, it is the mechanical execution of a master predator. Yet, if the beak is the weapon that ends the struggle, we must ask, what governs the hand that wields it? To view the giant squid as a mere biological machine, a collection of reflex and muscle, is to miss the most sophisticated layer of its existence. Beneath the mantle, coiled around the digestive tract and the massive, central beak, lies a complex nervous system that challenges our very understanding of non-vertebrate intelligence. The brain of Architeuthis dux is not a singular, centralized lump as we might imagine. Instead, it is a decentralized network, a distributed intelligence where much of the thinking actually happens in the limbs themselves. This is a radical evolutionary departure. Because the squid's body is so vast and its appendages so long, sending a signal from the central brain to the tip of a tentacle would be too slow for the split-second requirements of deep-sea predation. To solve this, the squid has evolved a local intelligence. Each arm and tentacle possesses its own semi-autonomous clusters of neurons. These ganglia can process sensory data, the texture of a prey's skin, the resistance of a struggle, the chemical signature of a scent, and initiate a response without waiting for a command from the central brain. In essence, the giant squid does not just hunt with its mind, it hunts with its entire body. This intelligence is not merely reflexive, it is highly specialized. While we often associate high-level cognition with mammals, the cephalopod brain is built for a different kind of complexity: pattern recognition and spatial awareness in a three-dimensional void. The giant squid must navigate a world of perpetual darkness, calculating trajectories and anticipating the movements of prey based on nothing but minute changes in water pressure and bioluminescent flickers. But this cognitive power is inextricably linked to the mechanics of its consumption. The beak, as we have seen, is a masterpiece of chitinous engineering, but its operation requires more than just brute force. The process of feeding is a highly coordinated neurological ballet. As the beak shears through tissue, the squid's sophisticated salivary glands secrete specialized enzymes. These are not just lubricants. They are biochemical agents that begin the process of breaking down proteins before the food even reaches the stomach. Furthermore, the squid faces a unique physiological challenge: how to swallow large, irregular masses in a high-pressure environment without choking or damaging its own internal organs. The answer lies in the radula, a tongue-like organ covered in microscopic, tooth-like structures that sits just behind the beak. The radula acts as a biological conveyor belt, rasping and grinding the morsels into a fine paste, ensuring that the transition from the beak to the esophagus is seamless. This synergy between the high-speed processing of the decentralized nervous system and the surgical precision of the beak and radula creates a closed loop of predatory perfection. The brain perceives the movement, the limbs execute the capture, the local ganglia manage the struggle, and the beak delivers the final, calculated destruction. It is a system where intelligence is not an abstract concept, but a physical, mechanical necessity, a way to turn the chaos of the deep sea into a structured, efficient, and inevitable meal. But intelligence and consumption are only half of the equation. To truly master the abyss, the giant squid must solve a more fundamental problem: how to move through a world that is trying to crush it. In the crushing depths of the bathypelagic zone, movement is not a simple matter of swimming. It is a complex negotiation with fluid dynamics and extreme hydrostatic pressure. While most marine predators rely on the rhythmic, energy-intensive beating of fins or tails, Architeuthis ducks utilizes a far more elegant and violent method of locomotion: jet propulsion. This is not merely swimming in the traditional sense. It is the controlled, rapid expulsion of mass to create thrust. At the heart of this mechanism is the mantle, a powerful, muscular sac that serves as both the squid's protective housing and its biological engine. The physics here are governed by Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The squid draws a massive volume of water into its mantle cavity through a funnel-like opening. Then, through a sudden, coordinated contraction of the mantle muscles, it forces that water out through a specialized, flexible tube known as the siphon or hyponome. By directing the angle of this siphon, the squid can manipulate its vector of movement with startling precision, allowing it to dart laterally, vertically, or backward in an instant. However, performing this feat in the deep ocean presents a unique set of mechanical hurdles. In the high-pressure environment of the midnight zone, water is not just a medium. It is a heavy, resistant force. To achieve the bursts of speed necessary to intercept prey or evade a sperm whale, the squid must overcome immense drag. This requires an incredible amount of instantaneous power. Interestingly, research into cephalopod locomotion suggests that the giant squid doesn't just rely on muscle contraction alone, but on a sophisticated, elastic recoil system. The connective tissues within the mantle act like biological springs, storing potential energy during the intake phase and releasing it during the expulsion, maximizing the velocity of the water jet without exhausting the animal's metabolic reserves. Furthermore, we must consider the added mass effect. When a giant squid accelerates, it isn't just moving its own body. It is also accelerating the column of water immediately surrounding it. In the dense, high-pressure medium of the deep, this requires the squid to manage a complex relationship between its own inertia and the inertia of the ocean itself. If the jet is too weak, the squid remains stationary. If it is too erratic, it loses the streamlined efficiency required to glide through the dark. This propulsion system is also an exercise in extreme efficiency. Because oxygen is scarce in the deep, the squid cannot afford the metabolic cost of constant, high-speed cruising. Instead, it has evolved to be an intermittent mover. It uses jet propulsion for high-stakes, high-velocity maneuvers, the strike, the escape, the sudden repositioning, while relying on more subtle, energy-saving movements for cruising. It is a masterclass in biological economy. A predator that spends most of its time as a ghost in the water, only to transform into a high-pressure kinetic projectile the moment the hunt begins. But what happens when the kinetic projectile is no longer the hunter, but the hunted? When a burst of speed is not enough to outrun a predator, or when a tactical retreat is required, the giant squid transitions from a master of physics to a master of chemistry. In the pitch-black theater of the deep sea, visibility is a rare and precious commodity. To an organism like the sperm whale, which navigates via echolocation, the world is defined by sound and shape. But for many other deep-sea predators, sight is the primary way to detect movement. It is here that the giant squid deploys its most iconic, yet scientifically misunderstood, weapon, the ink cloud. We often think of ink as a simple visual shroud, a dark curtain pulled across the stage to facilitate an escape. But in the bathypelagic zone, an ink cloud is far more sophisticated than a mere smoke screen. It is a multi-sensory disruption. When the ink is expelled from the ink sac, it is not just a pigment, it is a complex chemical cocktail. The primary component is melanin, a dark pigment that provides the visual opacity. However, recent studies into cephalopod chemistry suggest that these clouds may also contain various compounds designed to confuse the chemoreceptors of predators. In an environment where many animals smell or taste the water to find their way, an ink cloud can act as a chemical fog, overwhelming a predator's sensory input and leaving it disoriented in a cloud of biological noise. Even more fascinating is a phenomenon known as pseudomorphing. In certain cephalopods, the ink is expelled in a concentrated, viscous mass that holds its shape for a few critical seconds. This creates a decoy, a dark, squid-shaped silhouette that mimics the actual body of the animal. As the predator strikes at this phantoming shape, the real Architeuthis dux uses its mantle to jet away in a completely different direction. It is a high-stakes game of misdirection, a biological sleight of hand performed in a realm where shadows are the only reality. Yet there is a darker, more insidious side to this defense. In the deep ocean, the ink cloud does not simply dissipate, it lingers. Because the water in the midnight zone is incredibly still and lacks the turbulent mixing of the surface, a released ink cloud can remain suspended for an extended period, creating a localized zone of sensory deprivation. Furthermore, we must consider the metabolic cost of this warfare. Producing melanin and the complex proteins required for ink is energetically expensive. For a creature living on the edge of starvation in the oxygen minimum zone, every gram of ink is a precious resource. This suggests that the deployment of an ink cloud is not a casual reflex, but a calculated decision, a last resort expenditure of life-sustaining energy. The ink cloud is, therefore, more than a simple escape mechanism. It is a testament to the squid's evolutionary ingenuity. It is a weapon that exploits the very darkness the squid calls home, turning the ocean's most fundamental characteristic, the absence of light, into a tactical advantage. In the silent, high-pressure void, the giant squid doesn't just hide in the dark. It creates its own darkness, weaponizing the void to ensure its survival. But how does an organism sustain such high-stakes biological warfare and massive physical scale in a realm where energy is the most precious currency of all? To understand the giant squid, we must move past the image of a ravenous, relentless hunter and instead view it as a master of biological economy. In the bathypelagic zone, food is not a constant. It is a rare, unpredictable windfall. There are no lush kelp forests here, no teeming coral reefs. There is only the marine snow, a slow, ghostly descent of organic detritus falling from the sunlit layers far above. For most creatures, this is a meager diet. For a giant, it is a logistical nightmare. This brings us to the central paradox of Architeuth's ducks. How can a creature of such immense proportions survive in a desert of calories? The answer lies in a highly specialized metabolic strategy. Unlike the highly active, warm-blooded mammals that hunt them, giant squids are built for sit-and-wait efficiency. They are not marathon swimmers, they are ambush specialists. Their physiology is designed to minimize basal metabolic rate, the energy required just to keep the lights on, so to speak. By maintaining a low-energy state for much of their lives, they can endure long periods between successful hunts. While we often think of squids as being incredibly fast, their movement is an exercise in calculated expenditure. Every jet of water through the mantle is a withdrawal from a finite biological bank account. To manage this, the giant squid has evolved a unique muscular composition. They possess a high proportion of slow-twitch muscle fibers, which are incredibly efficient at maintaining posture and steady movement without consuming massive amounts of oxygen or ATP. This allows them to drift through the darkness, nearly invisible and nearly motionless, conserving every joule of energy for the moment of the strike. Furthermore, we must look at the chemistry of their blood. In the oxygen minimum zones where they reside, oxygen is a scarce resource. To combat this, the giant squid utilizes hemocyanin, a copper-based protein, to transport oxygen through its system. While hemocyanin is generally less efficient than the iron-based hemoglobin found in humans, in the cold, high-pressure depths, it functions as a highly specialized tool, allowing the squid to extract every possible molecule of oxygen from the water with minimal metabolic overhead. Even their growth patterns hint at this mastery of scarcity. Evidence suggests that giant squids may undergo periods of rapid growth fueled by massive, infrequent meals, perhaps a deep-sea fish or even a smaller squid, followed by long periods of metabolic dormancy. They are the ultimate opportunists. They do not chase the feast, they wait for the feast to pass by, and when it does, they strike with a burst of energy that is as violent as it is efficient. This metabolic mastery turns the giant squid from a mere predator into a biological marvel of endurance. They have mastered the art of living large in a world that offers very little. In the deep, survival isn't about who can eat the most. It is about who can survive on the least. The giant squid has turned the scarcity of the abyss into its greatest evolutionary strength, proving that in the dark, the most successful hunter is the one who knows exactly when to spend and when to save. But if the giant squid is a master of conservation, how does it transition from a state of near dormancy to the explosive violence required to capture prey? To understand the hunt, we must first understand the silence. In the midnight zone, movement is a liability. Every vibration, every sudden displacement of water can alert a potential victim or a larger predator to a hunter's presence. The giant squid does not hunt like a wolf through endurance or pursuit, it hunts like a phantom. This is the art of passive detection. While we have discussed their massive, dinner plate-sized eyes, their true predatory advantage lies in how they use them. These eyes are not merely looking for shapes. They are specialized sensors designed to detect the minute, bioluminescent glimmers produced by the movement of other organisms. When a deep-sea fish or another squid moves, it often disturbs bacteria or triggers a chemical defense, creating a tiny, flickering light in the void. To the Architeuths, this isn't just a light. It is a beacon, a roadmap to a meal. But seeing the prey is only half the battle. The squid must bridge the gap between its drifting, low-energy state and the high-velocity strike without revealing its position prematurely. This is where their unique neurobiology comes into play. The giant squid possesses a highly centralized nervous system that allows for near-instantaneous, reflexive bursts. They can remain virtually motionless, their slow-twitch muscles maintaining a steady hover until the exact moment the prey enters their strike zone. Then, the transition occurs. It is a terrifying shift from stillness to chaos. The squid utilizes its two long feeding tentacles, specialized appendages that are distinct from its 8 arms, to execute a strike that is faster than the human eye can process. These tentacles are equipped with a dense array of serrated suction cups, many of which feature chitinous rings. These aren't just for gripping. They are designed to lock onto the slippery, gelatinous skin of deep-sea organisms, ensuring that once contact is made, there is no escape. The mechanics of the strike are a masterclass in fluid dynamics. By utilizing a sudden, concentrated jet of water through the mantle, the squid can propel its body and tentacles forward in a localized burst of speed. This is a high-cost maneuver, a massive withdrawal from that metabolic bank account we discussed, but it is precisely calibrated. The goal is to minimize the time the prey has to react to the pressure wave of the squid's approach. Once the tentacles have ensnared the prey, they are pulled inward toward the center of the body, where the 8 arms take over, wrestling the victim toward the beak. This is the moment of ultimate efficiency. The beak, a sharp, parrot-like structure composed of incredibly hard chitin, acts as the final, decisive tool, shearing through muscle and bone with minimal wasted effort. In this darkness, the hunt is not a chase. It is a sudden, violent intersection of 2 paths. The giant squid does not need to be faster than everything in the ocean. It only needs to be faster than its prey for a fraction of a second. By combining the patience of a ghost with the suddenness of a lightning strike, Architeuthis dux has perfected a predatory strategy that allows it to thrive in a world where every mistake is fatal. But once the strike is completed, the question remains: what exactly is being pulled into that crushing, chitinous beak? In the vast, empty expanse of the bathypelagic zone, calories are the ultimate currency, and the giant squid is a high-stakes investor. To sustain a body of such immense proportions in a desert of darkness, it cannot afford to be a picky eater. It must be an opportunistic specialist. While popular imagination often depicts the Architeuthis as a monster that devours anything in its path, the reality of its diet is a study in deep-sea ecology. The primary targets of the giant squid are other deep-sea cephalopods, smaller squid species that inhabit the same midnight layers. These are high-protein, high-fat meals that provide the immediate energy surge required to replenish the metabolic debt incurred during the hunt. However, the menu extends far beyond its own kind. Through the analysis of stomach contents from recovered specimens, we have gained a glimpse into a diet that includes deep-sea fish, such as various species of grenadiers and even smaller, more agile teleosts. But perhaps most fascinating is the role of marine snow and the smaller, gelatinous organisms that drift through the water column. While the squid is a predator of muscle and bone, it also occupies a niche where it can capitalize on the sudden influx of nutrients that sink from the layers above. There is a scientific nuance here that often goes overlooked: the squid's role in the biological pump. By consuming mid-water organisms and then being consumed itself, or by dying and sinking, the giant squid facilitates the movement of carbon and nitrogen through the ocean's vertical layers. But what of the mechanics of the meal itself? To ingest prey in a high-pressure environment, the squid utilizes a specialized anatomical feature known as the radula. This is a tongue-like organ covered in microscopic, razor-sharp teeth that works in tandem with the beak. Once the beak has severed a piece of flesh, the radula acts like a biological conveyor belt, rasping the tissue into manageable fragments and pulling it down the esophagus. This process is not merely about consumption, it is about precision. Because the giant squid lives in a realm where food is infrequent, it has evolved to maximize every single gram of intake. Every morsel is stripped of its nutritional value. There is no waste in the abyss. Yet, this diet comes with a biological cost. As a predator of other deep-sea creatures, the giant squid is subject to the phenomenon of bioaccumulation. The toxins and heavy metals that build up in the tissues of smaller fish and squid are concentrated as they move up the food chain, eventually reaching the massive, concentrated tissues of the architeuthis. As the squid feeds, it is participating in a cycle that has remained unchanged for millions of years, a cycle of consumption and survival. It is a predator that is perfectly calibrated to the scarcity of its home, turning the rare, flickering shadows of the deep into the fuel required to maintain its status as a titan of the trenches. In the dark, a meal is never just a meal. It is a hard-won victory in the eternal struggle to stay alive. But what happens when a predator of this magnitude meets a hunter even larger? In the crushing darkness of the bathypelagic, there exists a biological paradox, a predator that is also, fundamentally, a prey item. This is the central tension of the giant squid's existence, a tension embodied in its relationship with the sperm whale, Pfister macrocephalus. This is not merely a predator-prey dynamic, it is a specialized, evolutionary arms race, an eternal duel played out in a theater of absolute shadow. To understand this conflict, we must look at the sperm whale, a creature that has evolved to become the ultimate deep-diving specialist. While the giant squid uses jet propulsion and stealth to navigate the void, the whale uses sound. Through sophisticated echolocation, the whale sends out high-frequency clicks that penetrate the gloom, mapping the three-dimensional space of the abyss. It is looking for the specific acoustic signature of large, soft-bodied cephalopods. When the whale finds its target, the hunt is not a chase of speed, but a pursuit of sensory dominance. The sperm whale descends into the squid's realm, diving to depths exceeding 2,000 meters, holding its breath for over an hour, entering a state of physiological extremity to reach its prize. But the giant squid is not a passive victim. It is a creature of defensive brilliance. As the whale closes in, the squid may deploy its most desperate gambit, a massive cloud of ink. Unlike the ink of shallow-water cephalopods, which is designed to create a visual screen, the deep-sea ink of the architeuthis is thought to contain chemical compounds that may disrupt the whale's highly sensitive olfactory and sensory perceptions, providing a fleeting window for escape. However, the duel often leaves permanent marks. For decades, the true nature of this combat was a matter of maritime myth, until marine biologists began documenting something startling on the skin of living whales. When sperm whales surface, they often bear the harrowing scars of battle. These are not mere scratches. They are circular, white, necrotic lesions, distinctive suction cup scars left by the giant squid's massive tentacles. These scars are biological evidence of a violent struggle. They tell us that the squid does not go down without a fight, using its chitinous, tooth-lined suckers to latch onto the whale's thick epidermis, attempting to anchor itself or even strike at the whale's sensitive eye. This combat is a high-stakes gamble for both parties. For the whale, a successful hunt provides the massive caloric intake required to maintain its enormous brain and blubber layers. But a failed encounter can be fatal. A squid's beak, though small compared to a whale, can cause significant injury, and the struggle can lead to exhaustion or infection. For the squid, the stakes are even more binary. It is either the consumer or the consumed. This relationship creates a fascinating ecological feedback loop. The sperm whale acts as a mobile bridge, transporting the nutrients of the deep sea back to the surface. By hunting the giant squid and then ascending to the sunlight zone, the whale effectively pumps the energy harvested from the midnight zone into the upper layers of the ocean. The duel, therefore, is more than a fight for survival. It is a vital mechanism of the ocean's deep-sea nutrient cycle, a violent, rhythmic pulse that keeps the heart of the abyss beating. If these scars are the fingerprints of a monster, then what exactly is the nature of the weapon that leaves them? To look closely at a sperm whale's skin is to read a violent history book written in scar tissue. These markings are not random. They are precise, circular, and often arranged in clusters that mirror the anatomy of a cephalopod's limb. But a closer scientific inspection reveals something far more sophisticated than a simple bruise. The suckers of Architeuthis ducts are not merely smooth discs of muscle. They are ringed with sharp, serrated chitinous teeth. When a giant squid lashes out in the dark, it isn't just grabbing, it is anchoring. It is using these microscopic, razor-edged rings to saw into the whale's blubber, creating a mechanical grip that is nearly impossible to shake in the three-dimensional chaos of a deep-sea struggle. This brings us to a chilling realization. The combat is often directed at the whale's most vulnerable point, its eyes. In the pitch-black bathypelagic zone, sight is a luxury, and the sperm whale's eyes are its most critical sensory gateway. Biologists have observed that many whales bear specific scarring patterns around the orbital region. It is theorized that the squid's primary defensive strategy is a targeted strike, attempting to blind the predator to facilitate an escape. It is a high-stakes game of sensory sabotage. But the evidence of this war isn't found solely on the skin of the living. When a sperm whale dies and its carcass eventually sinks, a phenomenon known as a whale fall, it becomes a forensic site for marine biologists. Upon dissecting these massive remains, researchers frequently find the unmistakable remains of a struggle, partially digested squid beaks embedded deep within the whale's muscular tissue. These beaks, composed of incredibly hard, dark chitin, are the only part of the squid that can survive the whale's powerful digestive acids. Finding a beak lodged in a whale's stomach is the definitive smoking gun, proving that the predator and prey were locked in a terminal embrace. Furthermore, we must consider the metabolic cost of these encounters. For the sperm whale, every hunt is a calculated risk of caloric expenditure. A whale must decide if the energy gained from a giant squid is worth the potential for infection or the physical trauma of a prolonged struggle. For the squid, the combat is a matter of immediate survival. There is no retreat in the deep. There is only the desperate application of force. This combat is not merely a series of isolated incidents of violence. It is a fundamental driver of deep-sea evolution. The pressure of the hunt has forced the sperm whale to refine its echolocation to a surgical degree, and it has forced the giant squid to develop weaponry, beaks, teeth, and chemical ink that are among the most specialized in the animal kingdom. As we observe these scars, we are not just looking at wounds. We are looking at the physical manifestations of an evolutionary arms race that has been raging in the darkness, unseen by human eyes, for millions of years. The scars are the proof that even in the most desolate reaches of our planet, life is defined by the struggle to endure. But if this struggle is an evolutionary arms race, we must ask, what fuels the engine of such a massive machine? To understand the giant squid, we have to look beyond the violence of the hunt and peer into the invisible currents of energy that sustain life in the abyss. In the sun-drenched surface waters, life is driven by photosynthesis, a direct conversion of sunlight into caloric wealth. But as we descend into the bathypelagic zone, the sun becomes a memory. Here, the rules of survival change. The giant squid does not live in a world of abundance. It lives in a world of scavenging and strategic interception. It exists within a complex, vertical energy cycle known as the biological pump. Every day, a constant rain of organic debris, dead plankton, fecal pellets, and microscopic detritus drifts down from the productive upper layers of the ocean. Scientists call this marine snow. To the giant squid, this snow is the foundation of the entire deep-sea economy. While the squid itself is a high-level predator, Its existence is tethered to this slow, downward descent of carbon. The energy that fuels a massive Architeuthis strike today was likely captured by a tiny diatom near the surface months, perhaps even years ago. However, the squid does not merely wait for the snow to fall. It acts as a crucial bridge in the oceanic energy transfer. By hunting midwater species like bristlemiths, lanternfish, and smaller cephalopods, the giant squid concentrates the scattered, low-density energy of the mesopelagic zone into a concentrated, massive biological form. It is a master of caloric consolidation. It takes the small change of the ocean's energy and turns it into a high-stakes currency. This leads to a profound ecological paradox. The giant squid is a massive consumer, yet it is also a vital component of the deep-sea nutrient loop. In an environment where food is often the scarcest resource, the death of a giant squid is not an end, but a redistribution. When a squid dies, its carcass becomes a localized burst of immense energy. Much like the whale falls we discussed earlier, a fallen giant squid provides a concentrated feast for scavengers, from hagfish and sleeper sharks to specialized amphipods, that can sustain a localized ecosystem for years. Furthermore, we must consider the squid's role in the vertical migration. Many of the creatures the squid hunts participate in the largest migration on Earth, rising to the surface at night to feed and descending during the day to hide. By intercepting these travelers, the giant squid acts as a biological gatekeeper, regulating the flow of nutrients between the surface and the deep. It is a regulator of the abyss, ensuring that energy does not simply sink, but is processed, transformed, and recycled through the dark. Ultimately, the giant squid is more than just a monster of legend or a combatant in a silent war. It is a vital cog in a planetary-scale machine. It is a creature that lives at the intersection of light and dark, consuming the remnants of the sunlit world to fuel its reign in the shadows. To understand the squid is to understand that even in the most desolate trenches, nothing is wasted. Every strike, every scar, and every sinking body is part of a grand, eternal cycle of energy that keeps the heart of the ocean beating. But what happens to an ecosystem when a shadow this large moves through it? To understand the influence of Architeuthis ducks, we must look past the individual animal and view it as a biological force, a transient, heavy weight that shifts the very equilibrium of the deep. In the vast, sparsely populated reaches of the bathypelagic zone, the presence of a giant predator does more than just remove individuals from a population. It dictates the behavior, the distribution, and the evolutionary trajectory of entire communities. This is the concept of the landscape of fear. In the deep sea, where light is a luxury and visibility is near zero, the threat of a giant squid creates a psychological architecture in the water column. For the mid-water species that make up the bulk of the ocean's biomass, the lanternfish, the bristlemiths, and the small crustaceans, the squid is a ghost that can appear from any direction. This constant, looming threat forces these prey species into specialized niches. They may compress their vertical migrations, staying deeper for longer to avoid the squid's massive, sensitive eyes, or they may develop even more sophisticated bioluminescent counterillumination to hide their silhouettes. In this way, the squid acts as an invisible sculptor, carving out the survival strategies of 1,000 lesser species through the sheer pressure of its existence. The squid's influence also extends to the regulation of population density. Without apex predators like the giant squid, the mid-water zones could face catastrophic boom and bust cycles. If populations of smaller cephalopods or fish grew unchecked, they could overconsume the delicate marine snow and zooplankton that form the base of the deep-sea food web, leading to a localized collapse. The giant squid acts as a stabilizer, a high-level regulator that keeps the energy flow from becoming top-heavy. It prunes the population, ensuring that the biological pump continues to function smoothly, preventing any one species from monopolizing the scarce caloric resources of the abyss. We must also consider the chemical footprint of these titans. The giant squid is a master of rapid, high-energy movement, a feat that requires intense metabolic processing. As they hunt and move, they release metabolic byproducts and nitrogenous waste into the water, concentrated pockets of nutrients in an otherwise nutrient-poor desert. These microreleases, though small on a global scale, contribute to the localized chemical complexity of the deep, fueling the microbial life that forms the very foundation of the dark ocean's chemistry. Even the way they hunt leaves a permanent mark on the ocean's biological ledger. Every time a giant squid engages in a struggle with a sperm whale, it is not just a battle between two titans. It is a massive transfer of biomass and energy. The blood, the tissue, and the discarded remains of such encounters are cast into the currents, serving as a high-octane fuel for the scavengers of the trenches. The giant squid is not merely a resident of the deep. It is a primary architect of its structure. It is a creature that manages the chaos of the abyss through the simple, brutal necessity of its hunger. By controlling the flow of life, the movement of species, and the distribution of nutrients, the giant squid ensures that the dark, silent depths remain a dynamic living system, rather than a stagnant graveyard. But how do we bridge the gap between these invisible biological forces and the tangible reality of the creature itself? For centuries, the answer didn't come from the depths, but from the debris left behind by the tide. Before we had the technology to peer into the midnight zone, our only window into the world of Architeuth's ducks was through the grim, salt-crusted remains washed up upon our shores. To the early naturalists of the 18th and 19th centuries, these were not merely biological specimens. They were the physical evidence of a nightmare. Imagine a coastal village in the North Atlantic where a storm has just retreated, leaving behind a massive, gelatinous mass tangled in the kelp and driftwood. It is a creature of impossible proportions, a colossal, tapering mantle, limbs that stretch longer than a man is tall, and a beak so sharp and powerful it looks more like a tool of industry than a part of an animal. These relics were the first hard data points in a sea of folklore. For the first time, the kraken ceased to be a mere metaphor for the dangers of seafaring and became a biological reality. However, these carcasses presented a profound scientific paradox. When a giant squid dies and drifts to the surface, it undergoes a radical transformation. In the crushing pressures of the deep, the squid's body is held together by the very weight of the water. As it rises, the gases within its tissues expand, and the delicate structural integrity of its mantle begins to fail. By the time a carcass reaches a beach, it is often a ghost of its true self, a shapeless, decaying mass of protein and seawater. This led to a period of intense scientific skepticism. How could a creature that appeared so soft, so fragile, and so disorganized in death possibly be the terrifying engine of destruction described by whalers? Early biologists struggled to reconcile these limp, translucent remains with the violent scars found on the skin of sperm whales. They were looking at the aftermath without understanding the action. One of the most significant, yet overlooked, aspects of these early discoveries was the realization of the squid's unique tissue composition. Unlike fish, which possess bony skeletons, the giant squid is largely composed of highly hydrated, non-compressible tissue. This meant that their carcasses were incredibly difficult to preserve. Early museum specimens often shriveled into unrecognizable, leathery lumps, leading many scientists to believe they were looking at nothing more than oversized, aberrant versions of common oceanic jellyfish or smaller squid species. Furthermore, these shore-found relics provided the first clues into the creature's true scale. It was through the careful measurement of these discarded limbs, often found detached from the main body, that researchers began to calculate the staggering length of the animal. They realized that the monster wasn't just a large squid. It was a biological outlier that defied the standard scaling laws of the ocean. These carcasses were the breadcrumbs left by a titan, the only physical proof that the landscape of fear we have discussed was not a psychological projection, but a reality governed by a flesh and blood predator. The shorebound remains were the first step in a long, arduous journey from seeing the squid as a myth to understanding it as a masterpiece of evolution. But if these shorebound carcasses were the breadcrumbs, then the century that followed was a frantic, intellectual scramble to follow them back to the source. This was the era of speculation, a period where science was caught in a tug-of-war between the growing discipline of oceanography and the lingering shadows of myth. As the 19th century progressed, the scientific community was no longer content with merely cataloging what the tide brought in. The birth of modern oceanography, fueled by expeditions like the Challenger expedition of the 1870s, began to push the boundaries of human knowledge. For the first time, we weren't just looking at the surface. We were beginning to understand that the ocean had a vertical architecture, layers of depth, temperature, and pressure that functioned like distinct, alien worlds. Yet, even as the maps of the seafloor began to take shape, the giant squid remained a phantom. It occupied a frustrating, blind spot in the scientific consciousness. Because the Architeuthis lived in the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone, it existed in a realm that no human eye had ever seen. This created a profound epistemological crisis. How do you prove the existence of a creature that refuses to be seen? During this era, the hunt for proof became a battle of methodologies. On one side were the empiricists, who demanded a living specimen, a creature captured and breathing in a tank. On the other were the theorists, who argued that the squid could be understood through the circumstantial evidence of the deep. They looked at the biological fingerprints left in the wake of the predator. They studied the suction cups, not just as simple grippers, but as complex structures with serrated chitinous rings designed to lock onto slippery, deep-sea skin. They analyzed the chemical composition of the ink, wondering if its properties were specialized for the unique light-scattering qualities of the deep. One of the most fascinating, yet often overlooked, debates of this period involved the squid's metabolic mystery. Scientists began to theorize that, for a creature of such immense size to exist in the nutrient-poor depths, it couldn't possibly be a constant, active hunter like a tuna or a shark. They speculated that it must be an opportunistic ambush predator, a creature of low energy expenditure that waited in the darkness for a rare, high-calorie encounter. This was a radical departure from how most large predators were understood at the time. But the skepticism remained stubborn. Many prominent zoologists dismissed the giant accounts as nothing more than a misidentification of tauterodes, or common squid, which can appear much larger when bloated by decay. The scientific establishment was hesitant to grant monster status to an animal that defied the standard anatomical rules they had spent centuries codifying. The era of speculation was, in essence, a period of intellectual tension. We were standing on the deck of ships, peering into a black abyss, armed with nothing but rudimentary sounding lines and a growing, desperate curiosity. We had the clues, the serrated scars on whales, the massive, detached tentacles, the strange, non-compressible biology, but we lacked the one thing that would finally silence the skeptics: a way to descend. The hunt for proof was no longer just about finding a body. It was about finding a way to enter the sanctuary of the abyss itself. For decades, we were like spectators at a locked door, staring through a keyhole at a world we could only dream of entering. We had the theories, the anatomical fragments, and the mathematical models of pressure, but we were biologically barred from the truth. To see the giant squid, we didn't just need better telescopes or stronger nets. we needed to reinvent the very concept of human presence. We had to build a way to exist where the human body was never meant to survive. This was the genesis of the deep-sea submersible, a feat of engineering that required us to solve a paradox. How do you build a vessel that is both incredibly strong to resist the crushing weight of the abyss, yet light enough to move through the water? In the early 20th century, the challenge was nothing short of existential. At the depths where Architeuthis reigns, the pressure is not merely a weight. It is a physical force that can exceed 8 tons per square inch. To put that in perspective, it is equivalent to having an elephant stand on your thumb. Early attempts at deep-sea exploration often relied on bathyspheres, essentially heavy steel spheres lowered on thick cables. While revolutionary, they were tethered, immobile, and essentially blind. They were cages, not explorers. They could descend, but they could not truly search. The real breakthrough came when engineers moved away from the idea of a mere sinker and toward the concept of a submersible. This required a transition from heavy, primitive iron to advanced metallurgy and, eventually, the use of syntactic foams, specialized materials composed of microscopic hollow glass spheres embedded in an epoxy resin. This was a crucial, less discussed scientific leap. Without the buoyancy provided by these non-compressible materials, a deep-sea vessel would either sink like a stone or be crushed by the very density of the water it sought to navigate. As the mid-20th century arrived, the advent of the titanium pressure hull changed everything. Titanium offered a strength-to-weight ratio that steel could never match, allowing for thicker walls that could withstand the bathypelagic squeeze while maintaining enough buoyancy to return to the surface. This was the era of the pioneers, men like Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, who in 1960 pushed the Trieste to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. While they weren't hunting squid, they proved the fundamental principle. The abyss was no longer a wall, it was a doorway. These machines were more than just metal shells. They were sensory extensions of the human mind. For the first time, we began integrating high-intensity discharge lamps and early, rudimentary sonar. But even with these advancements, the giant squid remained a shadow. The submersibles of the mid-century were bulky, slow, and operated on a terrifyingly thin margin of error. A single seal failure, a single hairline fracture in the viewport, and the ocean would reclaim the vessel in a fraction of a second. We had finally broken the barrier of pressure, but we had not yet broken the barrier of visibility. We had entered the room, but we were still stumbling through the dark, searching for a shape that had eluded us for 1,000 years. The engineering was there. The courage was there. Now, we only needed to find a way to truly see. What if the greatest monster in human history wasn't a ghost, but a living, breathing reality, waiting just beyond the reach of our lights? For centuries, our understanding of Architeuthis ducks was defined by the dead, by the bleached, rubbery carcasses washed up on distant shores or the grotesque, distorted shapes pulled up in trawl nets. These specimens were often damaged, their delicate tissues collapsing under the sudden transition from extreme hydrostatic pressure to the surface atmosphere. We were studying the wreckage of a life, never the life itself. We knew the size, the beak, and the terrifying reach of its tentacles, but we had no idea how it moved, how it hunted, or how it truly existed in its liquid kingdom. That changed in the early 21st century. The shift wasn't just about going deeper, it was about going smarter. The introduction of remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, changed the fundamental nature of deep-sea observation. Unlike the tethered, human-occupied submersibles of the past, these were agile, robotic sentinels. They were equipped with ultra-high-definition cameras and, crucially, sophisticated lighting arrays designed to minimize backscatter. The phenomenon where light reflects off tiny particles in the water, blinding the lens and turning the view into a white void. Then came the moment that bridged the gap between mythology and biology. In 2004, in the waters off the coast of Japan, the world finally saw the impossible. For the first time in recorded history, a live giant squid was captured on film in its natural habitat. As the ROV's lights cut through the eternal gloom of the bathypelagic zone, a shape materialized. It wasn't the static, limp monster of the museum displays. It was a creature of terrifying, fluid grace. As the footage rolled, scientists observed something that textbooks had only hypothesized: the mesmerizing, rhythmic pulsing of its mantle as it utilized jet propulsion to navigate the currents. We saw the skin, not as a dull, dead gray, but as a canvas of chromatophores, specialized pigment cells that allow the squid to manipulate its color and pattern. Even in the deep, where sunlight never reaches, these cells play a role in communication and camouflage, reacting to the presence of the submersible. Perhaps most striking was the movement of the arms. We saw the way the two long feeding tentacles, far longer than the 8 shorter arms, drifted through the water like ghostly ribbons, poised to strike at the slightest vibration. We saw the way the light caught the massive, dinner plate-sized eyes that are not merely large, but are biologically engineered to detect the faintest bioluminescent flicker of a predator or prey from a distance. This wasn't just a video, it was a paradigm shift. It proved that the giant squid was not a sluggish scavenger, but a highly active, sophisticated predator. It confirmed that Architeuthis possessed a complex nervous system capable of rapid response in a high-pressure environment. The kraken had been stripped of its supernatural shroud and replaced by something far more compelling, a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. We had finally stopped looking at the pieces of the puzzle, and for one brief, breathtaking moment, we saw the whole picture. But even with that historic glimpse, a profound question remained. Was that a once-in-a-lifetime encounter, or merely a single frame in a much larger, hidden story? To answer that, we had to move beyond the occasional sighting and into the realm of persistent, digital surveillance. We had to learn how to inhabit the abyss without being crushed by it. This is where the ROV truly transcends being a mere tool and becomes our surrogate consciousness in the deep. While human-occupied submersibles are limited by the physiological fragility of the pilot, the need for oxygen, the psychological toll of isolation, and the absolute necessity of returning to the surface, the ROV is built for the endurance of the machine. These vehicles are tethered to the surface by fiber optic umbilicals, allowing for the real-time transmission of massive amounts of data. This means that a scientist sitting in a climate-controlled lab in Monterey or Tokyo can maneuver a robotic claw or adjust a camera lens thousands of meters below, reacting to a movement in the darkness with the precision of a surgeon. The true genius of modern ROV technology, however, lies in its ability to see the invisible. Beyond standard high-definition optics, we have deployed specialized sensors that allow us to map the ocean floor through acoustic imaging and LiDAR. But more importantly for our study of Architeuthis, we have developed low-light, high-sensitivity sensors capable of capturing the biological light of the deep. We have begun to understand that the giant squid does not live in total blackness, but in a world of flickering, chemical signals. Through ROVs, we can now observe how these cephalopods interact with the bioluminescent landscape. We've learned that the giant squid's skin is even more complex than we imagined. It doesn't just change color, it can potentially manipulate light patterns to disrupt the visual processing of its enemies. We are discovering that the deep sea is not a silent void, but a high-bandwidth communication network of light, and the ROV is our translator. Furthermore, these robotic explorers have allowed us to study the microecology of the squid's habitat. We are no longer just looking for the monster, we are looking for its footprints. ROVs equipped with sophisticated environmental DNA, or eDNA, samplers can now suck in small volumes of seawater and analyze the genetic traces left behind by passing organisms. This allows us to detect the presence of a giant squid even if we never actually see it, by identifying the microscopic skin cells or waste products it leaves in its wake. We are effectively building a digital nervous system for the ocean. By deploying fleets of autonomous and remotely operated vehicles, we are creating a persistent web of observation that spans the vast, dark reaches of the bathypelagic zone. We are moving from a period of accidental discovery to an era of systematic presence. The gap is closing. The veil is thinning. Through the lens of the ROV, the abyss is no longer a place where things are lost. It is becoming a place where things are finally, undeniably, found. But what if the most profound truths about the giant squid aren't written in the light of an ROV's lamp, but in the very code of life itself? For centuries, we have studied Architeuthis ducks through the lens of morphology, measuring the length of its tentacles, the diameter of its eyes, and the sharpness of its beak. We built our understanding of this predator on the physical relics it left behind, carcasses washed onto beaches or the scarred skin of a sperm whale. But physical anatomy can be deceptive. It tells us what a creature is, but it rarely tells us where it came from or how it became such a specialized marvel of evolution. This is where the DNA revolution has fundamentally shifted the paradigm of deep-sea biology. We are no longer limited to the macroscopic. We are diving into the molecular. Through advanced genomic sequencing, we have begun to peel back the layers of time, reading the biological blueprints that have been preserved in the cold, high-pressure dark for millions of years. The data we are extracting from these genetic sequences is nothing short of transformative. One of the most startling revelations from recent cephalopod genomics is the sheer scale of their genetic toolkit. While many organisms have a relatively static set of genes, the giant squid exhibits a staggering level of gene family expansion. This means that through evolution, they have effectively duplicated and specialized certain segments of their DNA, providing them with an unprecedented ability to adapt to extreme environments. Specifically, we are finding evidence of specialized gene clusters dedicated to metabolic efficiency and protein stability. In the crushing pressures of the bathypelagic zone, proteins tend to unfold and lose function, a process known as pressure-induced denaturation. The DNA of the giant squid, however, reveals the presence of unique, chaperone proteins and structural adaptations encoded directly into its genome, allowing its cellular machinery to function flawlessly where almost any other complex life would literally fall apart. Furthermore, genetic sequencing is solving the mystery of their evolutionary lineage. For a long time, there was debate about how closely related the giant species were to the smaller, more common squids we see in the shallows. The genomic data suggests a much more complex story of divergent evolution. It appears that the Architeuthis lineage underwent a radical evolutionary leap, perhaps driven by the colonization of the oxygen minimum zones. Their DNA shows traces of an evolutionary trajectory that prioritized sensory dominance and massive scale, allowing them to occupy an ecological niche that remained largely untouched by competition. Perhaps most fascinating is what the DNA tells us about their resilience. By comparing the genomes of different populations, scientists are beginning to map the connectivity of the deep ocean. We are discovering that these creatures are not isolated islands of life, but part of a vast, interconnected genetic web that spans entire ocean basins. We are moving past the era of merely identifying the monster. We are now decoding the very instructions that allowed a soft-bodied invertebrate to conquer the most hostile environment on Earth. The DNA is telling us that the giant squid is not an evolutionary accident. It is a highly tuned, genetically perfected masterpiece of deep-sea engineering. The code is being cracked, and as we read it, the mystery of the abyss only grows more profound. But if the genetic code provides the blueprint for this masterpiece, it raises a hauntingly simple question. If we have finally decoded the instructions for their existence, why do they remain so profoundly elusive? We have mapped the human genome, we have sent probes to the dusty plains of Mars, and we have cataloged millions of species across the continents. Yet, when it comes to Architeuthis ducks, our census is almost embarrassingly incomplete. We are staring at a vast, living population through a needle-sized keyhole. To understand why we have only seen a fraction of these giants, we have to move beyond the biology of the individual and look at the sheer, overwhelming mathematics of the abyss. The primary obstacle is the sampling paradox. In terrestrial biology, if you want to study a population, you can walk through a forest or survey a grassland. In the deep ocean, the territory is a three-dimensional volume of water so immense that our current technology is akin to trying to count the number of stars in the sky by looking through a single straw. The bathypelagic zone, where these creatures dwell, extends from 1,000 to 4,000 meters deep. It is a realm of staggering volume, and the giant squid does not congregate in predictable patterns. They are not migratory in the way salmon are. They are ghosts moving through a liquid desert. Furthermore, we must contend with the ephemeral nature of observation. Most of our encounters with the giant squid are accidental, the result of a carcass being swept upward by upwelling currents or a chance sighting by a deep-sea trawler. Even our most advanced remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, represent mere pinpricks of light in an infinite darkness. An ROV might spend hundreds of hours scanning a trench, only to witness a momentary shadow before the creature vanishes into the gloom. We are essentially trying to film a phantom in a room where the lights are turned off. There is also a biological reason for their scarcity: the energy constraint. In the deep ocean, food is a rare and precious currency. To maintain such massive, complex bodies, the giant squid cannot afford to be active or visible in the way a predator in the sunlight zone might be. They likely exist in a state of extreme metabolic economy, drifting through the dark, minimizing movement to conserve energy. This low-energy lifestyle means they don't leave the heavy biological footprints, such as large-scale waste or frequent surface activity, that scientists typically use to track animal populations. Perhaps most humbling is the realization of the scale disparity. We often assume that because we have seen a few dozen live specimens or found a handful of carcasses, we have a grasp on their numbers. But in the deep sea, the unseen majority is the rule, not the exception. Statistical modeling suggests that for every one giant squid we encounter, there may be thousands more drifting in the silence of the midnight zone, far beyond the reach of our cameras and our curiosity. We are currently in a race against time and technology. As we deploy smarter, more autonomous sensors, we are beginning to realize that the giant squid is not a rare anomaly, but a common inhabitant of a world we have barely begun to touch. We are not looking for a monster, we are looking for a civilization of shadows. But what if the very shadows we are struggling to track are beginning to shift? For decades, we operated under the comforting assumption that the abyss was a fortress, a cold, stable, and unchanging sanctuary, insulated from the chaotic fluctuations of the world above. We believed that while the surface might burn, the deep would remain a permanent, frozen vault. We were wrong. The deep ocean is not a static museum. It is a living, breathing system, and it is currently undergoing a profound and silent transformation. The most insidious threat to the giant squid isn't a sudden catastrophe, but a creeping thermal shift. As the atmosphere warms, the ocean absorbs over 90% of that excess heat. While the surface layers feel the sting immediately, the heat is slowly, inexorably percolating downward. This brings us to a phenomenon known as thermal stratification. As the upper layers of the ocean warm, they become less dense, creating a cap that prevents the mixing of water. This layer acts as a thermal lid, trapping heat at the surface and, more critically, preventing oxygen-rich surface water from sinking into the depths. For a creature like Architeuthis ducks, this creates a biological pincer movement. First, there is the metabolic tax. Even a fractional increase in ambient temperature accelerates the metabolic rate of ectothermic or cold-blooded animals. In the deep, where every calorie is hard-won, a warmer ocean means the giant squid's body demands more fuel just to maintain basic physiological functions. They are being forced to run an expensive biological engine in a world where the fuel supply is already precarious. Second, we must confront the expanding oxygen minimum zones, or OMZs. As warming waters hold less dissolved oxygen, these dead zones are migrating vertically, creeping upward and expanding into territories previously inhabited by deep-sea life. For a predator that relies on bursts of jet-propelled speed to hunt, oxygen is the ultimate currency. If the metabolic cost of living goes up while the available oxygen goes down, the ecological ceiling for these giants begins to collapse. We may find that the liquid desert they inhabit is becoming even more inhospitable, forcing them into narrower, shallower bands of water where they are more vulnerable to predators and more easily caught in the crosshairs of human industry. Furthermore, the warming ocean disrupts the marine snow, the constant, gentle rain of organic detritus that falls from the sunlit zones to feed the abyss. Changes in surface plankton blooms, driven by shifting currents and temperatures, can cause a mismatch in the timing of this nutrient delivery. If the feast at the surface fails, the famine in the deep follows. We are witnessing the rewriting of the deep sea's chemistry in real time. We are no longer just looking for a phantom in a dark room. We are realizing that the room itself is changing shape, temperature, and composition. The mystery of the giant squid is no longer just about where they are hiding, but whether the world they evolved to inhabit will still exist by the time we finally find them. The abyss is no longer a sanctuary. It is a frontier under siege. But what if the very shadows we are struggling to track are beginning to shift? If the warming of the oceans is a slow, metabolic siege, then a new, more violent industrial storm is gathering on the horizon. As we look toward the seafloor, we are no longer seeing merely a landscape of mystery, but a treasure map of immense, untapped wealth. Beneath the crushing pressures of the bathypelagic zone lie polymetallic nodules, potato-sized rocks rich in cobalt, nickel, and manganese. These minerals are the literal building blocks of our green revolution, essential for the batteries that power our electric vehicles and our renewable energy grids. But the cost of this transition may be the destruction of a world we have barely begun to name. Deep-sea mining represents a fundamental collision between human progress and biological preservation. The proposed method of extraction is not a surgical procedure. It is a heavy industrial assault. Giant, remote-operated machines, weighing several tons, are designed to crawl across the abyssal plains, stripping the top layers of the sediment to harvest these nodules. For a creature like the giant squid, which exists in a delicate balance of pressure and chemical stability, this introduces a chaotic new variable, the sediment plume. When these machines grind against the seafloor, they kick up massive, billowing clouds of silt and fine particulate matter. These plumes do not simply settle, they can travel for hundreds of kilometers, drifting through the water column like a thick, suffocating fog. For an organism that relies on highly specialized sensory organs, this is catastrophic. The giant squid's eyes, the largest in the animal kingdom, are evolved to detect the faintest bioluminescent flickers in a world of absolute darkness. A persistent cloud of suspended sediment could effectively blind these titans, rendering their primary method of hunting and predator avoidance useless. Even more insidious is the chemical disruption. The disturbance of ancient sediments can release sequestered heavy metals and toxins back into the water column, altering the delicate pH and chemical composition of the deep-sea environment. We are talking about a realm where life has evolved over millions of years in near-perfect stasis. To introduce sudden, localized toxicity is to gamble with an ecosystem that has no mechanism for rapid adaptation. Furthermore, we must consider the acoustic footprint of industry. The deep ocean is a world of sound, where vibrations travel vast distances. Giant squids and the sperm whales that hunt them rely on a complex auditory landscape to navigate and communicate. The relentless, low-frequency thrum of industrial mining equipment could create a wall of noise, masking the biological signals necessary for survival. It is a form of sensory pollution that could drive these elusive predators out of their traditional hunting grounds, or worse, trap them in zones of high toxicity and low visibility. We are standing at a terrifying crossroads. We are preparing to strip mine the very basement of the planet to save the atmosphere above it. In our rush to secure the minerals for a sustainable future, we risk silencing the most profound mysteries of the deep. We are reaching into the dark, not with cameras or sensors to observe, but with claws to extract. The question is no longer just whether we can find the giant squid, but whether we will destroy the very shadows they call home before we even realize they were there. But what if the very shadows we are struggling to track are beginning to shift? As we prepare to face the industrial onslaught of the deep, we find ourselves in a desperate race against time. A race not just to protect what is there, but to finally understand it. For centuries, our understanding of Architeuthis ducks has been reactionary, built upon the scraps of carcasses washed ashore or the fleeting, grainy glimpses provided by ROVs. We have been like blind men trying to map a cathedral by feeling its rubble. But a silent, digital revolution is currently descending into the abyss, bringing with it a new kind of observer: artificial intelligence. In the crushing darkness of the bathypelagic zone, the sheer volume of data is overwhelming. A single deep-sea expedition can generate terabytes of video footage, much of it consisting of empty, black voids or drifting marine snow. For a human researcher, sifting through thousands of hours of footage to find a single, momentary shimmer of a giant tentacle is a task that could take lifetimes. This is where AI changes the fundamental math of oceanography. We are now training neural networks, complex algorithms designed to mimic the human visual cortex, to do what no human eye can: monitor the darkness in real time. These AI models are being fed massive datasets of known marine life, teaching them to recognize the specific geometric signatures of a squid's mantle, the rhythmic undulation of its fins, or the distinct, bioluminescent spark of its specialized photophores. But the intelligence goes deeper than simple image recognition. We are moving into the realm of predictive ecology. By integrating AI with vast arrays of autonomous underwater vehicles, scientists are beginning to build digital twins of the deep ocean. These AI systems can process acoustic data from hydrophones, filtering out the chaotic noise of the ocean to identify the specific low-frequency, clicks, or movement signatures that might suggest a large cephalopod is passing through a sensor field. There is an even more profound application: the use of machine learning to decode the language of the deep. We know that many deep-sea organisms communicate through subtle light patterns and vibrations. AI can analyze these micro-fluctuations in bioluminescence that are too fast or too faint for the human eye to perceive, potentially allowing us to map the social or predatory behaviors of the giant squid without ever needing to see it clearly. Furthermore, AI is being used to bridge the gap between the seen and the unseen. By analyzing chemical traces in water samples and correlating them with historical movement patterns, machine learning models can create probability maps, predicting where a giant squid is most likely to be hunting at any given moment. It is a way of turning the entire ocean into a giant, intelligent sensor. Yet, this technological leap brings a haunting irony. As we deploy these sophisticated digital eyes to finally witness the majesty of the giant squid, we are doing so at the exact moment the habitat they inhabit is most at risk. We are perfecting the art of seeing them, just as we are perfecting the machinery that might erase them. We are finally learning to listen to the whispers of the abyss, only to realize that the silence we are so eager to break may be the only thing keeping these titans safe. But what if the most profound discoveries of the next century aren't made by humans alone, but by the machines we have breathed life into? As we stand on the precipice of this new era, the definition of an explorer is undergoing a radical metamorphosis. The traditional image of the oceanographer, a person peering through a thick glass porthole of a heavy manned submersible, is becoming a relic of the past. The future of deep-sea discovery belongs to the swarms. We are moving away from singular, expensive expeditions toward a decentralized, persistent presence in the abyss. Imagine thousands of bio-inspired microrobots, no larger than a human hand, drifting through the bathypelagic zone like a synthetic school of fish. These autonomous agents, equipped with soft robotics technology to withstand pressures that would crush titanium, will not just observe, they will integrate. These new explorers are being designed with soft body mechanics, mimicking the very cephalopods they seek to study. By using fluid-driven actuators rather than rigid gears, these drones can move through the water with the same silent, non-disruptive grace as a giant squid, preventing the acoustic pollution that often scares away deep-sea megafauna. They won't just record video, they will perform real-time eDNA, environmental DNA, sequencing. This is a game changer. Instead of needing to capture a specimen, a drone can simply gulp a liter of seawater, scan it for the microscopic genetic fragments shed by a passing Architeuthis, and transmit that data to the surface via acoustic modems. We will soon be able to track the movement of a squid through the dark not by seeing it, but by reading its biological exhaust left in its wake. Furthermore, we are looking toward the development of persistent benthic observatories, stationary, long-term sensor networks that act as the nervous system of the ocean floor. These stations, powered by thermal gradients or microbial fuel cells that harvest energy from the chemical richness of hydrothermal vents, will provide a continuous, decades-long heartbeat of the deep. They will witness the slow, rhythmic life cycles of the abyss, capturing the rare, once-in-a-decade interactions between predators and prey that current, fleeting expeditions always miss. But perhaps the most ambitious frontier is the concept of biomimetic telepresence. We are working toward a future where a scientist in a laboratory in Tokyo or London can inhabit a robotic avatar in the midnight zone, experiencing the pressure, the light, and the scale of the deep through a haptic interface. This isn't just remote control, it is sensory immersion. It allows us to navigate the complex, three-dimensional canyons of the deep with a level of dexterity and intuition that no current ROV can match. As we refine these tools, we are essentially building a bridge across the greatest divide in human knowledge. We are transitioning from being accidental witnesses to being intentional participants in the deep-sea narrative. The next generation of explorers will not be defined by the depth they can reach, but by the complexity of the questions they can ask of the dark. We are finally preparing to step into the cathedral, not as intruders breaking the silence, but as sophisticated observers, learning to speak the language of the shadows. But why, even as our sensors sharpen and our drones proliferate, does the shadow of the giant squid still feel so heavy with the unknown? It is a paradox of the modern age. We are mapping the seafloor with centimeter-level precision, yet the creature that inspired our greatest nightmares remains a ghost in the machine. We have more data than ever before, yet the true essence of Architeuthis ducks. Its behavior, its social structure, its very rhythm of life, remains tantalizingly out of reach. This is the enduring allure of the abyss. The ocean does not yield its secrets all at once. It reveals them in fragments, in glimpses, in the sudden flash of a colossal eye or the drift of a single, serrated tentacle. There is a profound psychological comfort in this mystery. To a species that thrives on certainty, the deep ocean represents the ultimate elsewhere. It is a realm where the laws of our terrestrial existence, the predictable cycles of sun and moon, the buoyancy of air, the linear progression of time, are rendered irrelevant. In the bathypelagic zone, time is measured by the slow descent of marine snow, and space is defined by the crushing weight of 3,000 meters of water. When we look into the dark, we aren't just looking for a predator. We are looking at a mirror of our own evolutionary origins, a place where life has mastered the art of existing in the impossible. Even as we transition from myth to molecular biology, the giant squid retains its status as a symbol of the sublime. Science has taught us that they are not monsters, but biological masterpieces, highly specialized organisms that utilize ammonium ions in their tissues to maintain neutral buoyancy, allowing them to drift through the darkness with minimal effort. We know they possess eyes the size of dinner plates, evolved not just to see, but to detect the faint, bioluminescent silhouettes of prey or the movement of a predator miles away. Yet, knowing the how of their existence does nothing to diminish the wonder of it. The mystery persists because the ocean is too vast to ever be truly conquered. We are currently exploring less than 5% of the global ocean floor. This means that for every giant squid we track via eDNA, there are thousands more pulsing through the darkness, unseen and untouched. There may be entire subspecies, entire ecological cascades, and entire evolutionary lineages hidden in the trenches that we have yet to even conceive. The ocean holds our imagination because it represents the last true frontier of the Earth. It is the only place left where the monsters are real, where the unknown is not a theoretical concept, but a physical presence waiting in the cold. As we continue to deploy our swarms of robots and our silent sensors, we must accept a humbling truth. We are not here to solve the ocean. We are here to witness it. The giant squid will continue to haunt our sensors and our dreams, not because we lack the technology to find it, but because the deep sea demands a reverence that science alone cannot provide. The mystery is not a problem to be solved. It is a testament to the infinite complexity of life, a reminder that even in an age of total information, there will always be shadows.